Hey everyone, I'm Ashleigh Banfield and this is Drop Dead Serious, and I am recording this on Sunday night, February 8th, and so this is the 7-day mark. 7 days ago, Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today's Show co-host Savannah Guthrie, was officially reported missing, and it has been a week, right? It's been a week. Instead of clarity in this case, I think it's fair to say the case has taken a pretty sharp turn. There's been alleged ransom demands all week long, different ones, some resolution to one at least, no resolution to the other ones. Law enforcement activity across this case has intensified. It's been on, it's been off, it's been on, it's been off, and that was the day again today and yesterday. Signals that something significant actually might be unfolding, but behind the scenes, right? I'm going to walk you through everything that happened this weekend because the facts alone in this case are enough to raise serious questions. And this isn't about theorizing or sleuthing. This is just about what has happened and what is happening in this case. And there's a lot. This weekend has been extraordinarily busy. And I think one of the strange things is the amount of activity at night. That's not normal. Typically, when we're on location, and I've spent a lot of years in the field, you know, things quieten down at night. That's when sort of the security comes in and, you know, people keep a watch on crime scenes or areas of interest. But there's not usually a ton of investigative work that goes on at night. Not this weekend. That is not at all what happened this week. In fact, in this episode, I'm going to walk you through a few very unusual things that happened. So for starters, they're starting to pull surveillance video from places in between Nancy's home and Annie's home. They're about 4 miles or so apart. I'll tell you who, why, and who actually pulled the video. It matters. Also, Savannah herself with her siblings released a short video on Instagram, and it was cryptic. Some people didn't pick up right away on what felt like a very sad message that they want to be reunited with their mother to celebrate. Others have picked up that they feel like that's a dire message, that things may not be what they had hoped. But again, cryptic, and it's for you to decide. But I will play that for you, and you can, you know, weigh in how you want to. Fascinatingly, all this activity at Annie Guthrie's house late last night, and for 3 hours. And photographs being taken in the darkness and agents gloved and all the rest. I'm going to tell you all the things that we know about that new search that was being done at that home and why and what time and the uniqueness of it, as well as ransom letter details, or at least alleged ransom letter details. A TV station posted some of these details and then pulled it back, but not before it got out and it made its rounds. And so we now know some of the details of what these alleged ransom seekers may be seeking. You know, I think there's a lot to be said about the uniqueness, right? Ask anybody who's been in the business of the FBI or of hostage negotiations or kidnap for ransom business. This is not like all the others. It's very unusual. So I say alleged, you know, ransom letters because I'm not entirely convinced these are true. I think these are scammers overseas, more than likely trying to, parasitically get in on something and try and make some money. And then really interestingly, I'm going to show you some pictures a little bit, explain about some underground probing that was going on behind Nancy Guthrie's house today. Okay, let me get to some of the big activities of the day. Because like I said, it's been busy this weekend. I have to just sort of harken back to Friday night because the president was on Air Force One and made some comments that got people who are following this case very invested, right? He specifically referred to the Nancy Guthrie case and said this. I'm going to read, right? We have some clues that are very strong, and I think we could have some answers coming up fairly soon. I'm not talking about a search. I'm talking about a solution. We have some things I think that will maybe come out reasonably soon from FBI, DOJ, or whoever that could be definitive. A lot has taken place in the last couple of hours. That had people thinking there's movement here because, you know, not only were the words definitive used, but also agents showed up at Annie Guthrie's home. late into the evening on Saturday night. And there was a video released by Savannah Guthrie as well. So there was some thought that there was like activity. And what I can tell you happened throughout Saturday, let's just take it, as the weekend progressed. Saturday, 2 different companies, they confirmed that the FBI had come to ask them for their surveillance video. So a Chevron gas station and a Circle K. And again, these are businesses that are found sort of within the vicinity between Nancy Guthrie's home and Annie Guthrie's home, again, about 4 or so miles between them. So it's interesting to hear that at least those 2 companies, my feeling is that it's probably not just 2 companies. Typically, law enforcement fans out everywhere. They go to every single place that might have a video running, including a Tesla, right? If a Tesla is parked in a driveway or even on the street in that vicinity, they'll come a knocking and ask, can we see if you maybe have one of those features on your Tesla that grabs video as movement goes by? But we do know of those 2. And then we learned about this new video that Savannah Guthrie released on her Instagram. It's very sad watching these 3 siblings who clearly are appearing in pain as they appeal to whomever it is sending these messages, these ransom or communication notes through the media. It is just so unorthodox in terms of the business of kidnap for ransom, because that is a business, folks. It's a global business, and they're not operating the way most do. But Savannah released this short, and I'm going to let you weigh in on the wording of it. But a lot of people in the business of sleuthing through the FBI, people who've worked in law enforcement who deal with kidnap for ransom or hostages, have said that this language seemed very coded and very specific. But here's how how she coded her message, how she said her message as she holds the hands of her siblings.
We received your message and we understand. We beg you now to return our mother to us so that we can celebrate with her. This is the only way we will have peace. This is very valuable to us, and we will pay.
Obviously, you have heard from law enforcement that they have to take all of these things seriously, right? You get ransom demands in, you have to investigate it. And if this all turns out to be, this parasite, these sideshows, these people who are trying to glom on and steal from crime victims, God, I hope they find them. Boy, and I hope they throw the book at them. We've got one allegation against a guy in California who had made his missives allegedly directly to Annie Guthrie and her husband, and he's been arrested. He's facing serious charges. But so far, there's no other news or announcements from law enforcement that they have traced who might be behind these other. First was ransom, second was communications. That's how it's being characterized. And again, very little communication that seems to be open for the Guthrie family to communicate back. And so this is how Savannah and her siblings are releasing their communications to whomever it is that's doing this. But it's very upsetting to hear, we want our mother back so that we can, that we can celebrate with her. It's unusual wording, and we will pay. This is important to us, and we will pay. And to the point about the typical modus operandi of a kidnapper, I want to read you something from Lee Wallace. She goes by Lawyer Lee on Twitter. She's been a trial attorney for 30 years, Harvard law grad. She says, Nancy Guthrie's case makes so little sense to me as a kidnapping. As a lawyer, I've been involved in many high-profile cases, and they are way more complicated because of the media presence. Kidnappers usually ask for privacy and secrecy. It would make no sense to kidnap the mom of a media celebrity because you're getting the opposite. So I think very insightful. Once again, how many times have you seen, even in the movies, you involve the police and game over, right? Okay, so Saturday night, just a flurry of activity 4 miles down the road from Nancy Guthrie's home, the crime scene from which Nancy Guthrie was abducted, at Annie Guthrie's home. There were 3 vehicles that showed up. They were unmarked, white vehicles, parked, and multiple sheriff's deputies went into the house, but not before some of the reporters who were outside noticed a couple of very important things. First and foremost, one of them appeared to be pulling out some it's hard to say whether it was a very thin, wide, large case or whether it was a folding white table. To me, it looked like a folding white table, but it could have been a thin white or silver case. And it wasn't long before all of a sudden the reporters outside noticed that they weren't turning all the lights on when they went into this dark home, and it's late in the evening, into the night. But there were some lights going on towards the back of the house and then going off. But then there were flash bulbs, what appeared to be flash bulbs going off, as though there were photographs being taken inside this dark home that did not appear to be occupied by the Guthrie family. Interesting because of the hour that this happened. And I know there's a lot of speculation online. So many people are saying that's because luminol, you see it in the darkness. I'm not so sure that that's the right leap to make, only because nowhere do we see any of these law enforcement officers with Tyvek suits or any kind of forensic clothing. And that's usually what you would see if there's luminol testing going on. You would see people draped. And we didn't see them going in with big bags that they could change inside either. So it is a really curious development. And what's even more curious maybe was that they were in there for 3 hours, about 3 hours. Very long time for these multiple officers to be inside. And again, these flashes going off as though it was flash photography in the dark, dark house. Then eagle-eyed reporters, Brian Enton among them, and Michael Ruiz from Fox News noticed that when at least one of those deputies came out, you could see clearly insignia of the sheriff's department, not the FBI. And one of them was wearing blue latex gloves. Very interesting. And carrying a paper bag. Evidence bags come in all types of shapes and sizes, and oftentimes they can look like brown paper bags as well. This was not, it didn't appear to me to be sealed, but the sheriff's deputy was carrying the brown paper bag as well as that big white folding table or thin silver, case of some kind. So just a fascinating development. And then they all pulled out without talking to any of the press there, but the press stayed, and there were a lot of press because, again, this was around 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night. It's an unusual time to be doing this kind of forensic processing, if that's what they're doing, especially on day 7, very unusual of this disappearance and this mystery. So another thing that deputies were observed on location, they had large maps affixed to the side of a truck. And that's not so unusual. If you look at them, I can't tell exactly, but they appear to be consistent with like property records, maybe land surveys of this area, parcel maps, maybe that kind of thing, just trying to help investigators get a lay of the land for the neighborhood and the neighbors. And, this is very rough terrain outside of Nancy Guthrie's home and outside of Annie Guthrie's home. It's very rough. It's thick, and there are cacti, and it's rugged. It's, for lack of a better word, sort of rugged desert. Not easy to walk through, very prickly and dangerous, and there's probably wildlife you got to be careful of. But there's been a lot of activity. And I keep going back to Monday. Why was the search called off Monday? We're 30 hours into this disappearance. No need to search. Search is permanently disbanded unless or until we need to do something. Why? It's so odd, so soon after this mysterious disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, that there'd be no officers fanning out in these back rugged desert areas behind these houses. But the maps are out now, and we don't know exactly what they're looking for, but it certainly did start to make a little bit more sense because Sunday, we started to see very specific activity, okay? So the specific activity that we saw behind Nancy Guthrie's house was agents finding what looked like, for lack of a better description, a manhole cover, a tank cover, could be a septic tank cover, water tank cover, and they removed it. I would say it's probably 2 feet in diameter. Big, very big. And they began to probe with a big, long probe down into this underground tank. So a lot of speculation, what kind of tanks were those? I saw a lot of people talking about septic tanks, some people talking about water tanks. Let me tell you a little bit about what I know about that. Not the definitive source on this at all, but I have a septic tank up in Canada, and I grew up with septic tanks up in Canada. Michael Ruiz from Fox actually queried the neighborhood and found out from that neighborhood that those properties are not on the septic system, and so everybody has their own septic systems and their septic tanks in their on their property. But a lot of people have cisterns too, water tanks, and I think at least one report and a photograph that I saw earlier this week showed what appeared to be like a water truck, almost like a water delivery truck, that may have been in the Nancy Guthrie's direct property area. Some people wondered if it was a pumper truck for septic. No, they're usually a lot bigger and they're not so see-through. This one was white and it looked more like a water truck. So it is possible that this was a cistern or a well or a water, an underground water tank. Also very, very possible that it is a septic tank. And the reason I know about septic tanks with larger openings is because over the course of several years, the debris will build up in the bottom, right? The sludge, the sediment, and you'll eventually have to get that out. A lot of the runoff, the water off the top, the gray water, et cetera, will run into the septic fields if you have a field, but that the sediment will fall to the bottom and eventually it will be too high and you got to get it out. So there are septic tanks that you can actually climb down into. My sister has one, and this could be one. I don't know, but I was fascinated when I saw that because I was hearkening back to the case of Jennifer Dulos 6 years ago now, May 24th. And Jennifer Dulos disappeared. Her husband, Fotis Dulos, took his own life before he could be convicted of any crime against her, but it's widely thought that he murdered her. And her body was never found. Mother of 5. But they did look in the septic tanks at Fotis Dulos' property. And I remember that well because they were looking everywhere. They had found evidence of her death, bloody clothes and clasps and rags and that kind of evidence that was thrown out in various garbage cans all along a street in Hartford, Connecticut. But they looked into the septic tank. And I will also tell you this. I covered a case in New Mexico. Cody Posey murdered his father, stepmother, and stepsister, and then piled their bodies into manure. And there was a lot of testimony on the stand from experts who said that decomposition would be light speed because of the heat from the manure. So oftentimes this is a thought. If you dispose of a body in septic or manure, that the decomposition is far quicker. Maybe that's what they were thinking when they were probing down in this tank behind Nancy Guthrie's house, but that was a pretty big development today. And it's also just very disturbing because I think many of us are desperate to have a positive resolution in this case, that Nancy Guthrie will come home to her family. She's an 84-year-old woman. She has mobility problems. She has health issues. She's been without her medication for a week, life-saving medication that was needed. So it's just hard to see probing like that, but it's what they have to do. Again, I go back to why wasn't that done Monday? Why weren't they searching Monday? Why did they call off the search Monday? What did they know Monday? What did they know Monday that they said nothing more to see here? Search called off permanently until or unless it's warranted. Something else that happened today, I think it was not supposed to happen, but it did happen. Local TV station KGUN published details of one of these alleged ransom demands, right? And then they removed the post, actually. They pulled back the reporting, but not before it was disseminated widely and reported on. And the detail that came out today that was different than we didn't know was that these alleged kidnappers were demanding a final payout by 5:00 p.m. on Monday, February 9th. That would be tomorrow. And if that demand wasn't met, there'd be dire circumstances, her life would be in danger, and that the payout had to be $6 million in Bitcoin. So those were two details we had not heard before, that the ransom demand was $6 million. There's another series of reports that had suggested that the prior deadline of Thursday last week was $4 million. If you miss that deadline, it goes up to $6 million on Monday. I can't verify that report. That was part of additional reporting. I think the New York Post had some details about that, but KGUN's reporting that they pulled off the internet did say $6 million in Bitcoin by 5 o'clock Monday. Also, early Sunday morning, Sunday morning, February 8th is 1 week exactly from when Mrs. Guthrie was first reported missing. Do you remember? The story went that she didn't show for church and that friends from church contacted the Guthrie family, who came to do a wellness check, and within 7 minutes they were calling 911. Saw blood possibly on the front entrance. My source said a door left open in the back door, and other things that were obviously frightening enough to call 911 right away. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because there is some oddity to the church report, and I'll describe that in a moment, but I'm not convinced that Mrs. Guthrie goes to church. There's reporting that she hasn't gone to church physically since the pandemic. So how would anybody know that she hadn't gone to church? Get to that in a second. But this morning, Sunday morning, the sheriff's deputies showed up again. Sheriff's vehicle came and drove perpendicular to the entrance of Nancy Guthrie's driveway, blocking it. That's the first time we've seen that happen. Look, they've cordoned it off. They've put up crime scene tape before. That's happened. That's not unusual. But today, the sheriff's deputy blocked off Nancy Guthrie's driveway. And also, another unusual occurrence, but maybe not so unusual. I'm surprised we haven't seen it every day, actually. So the Guthries have hired private security for both Nancy Guthrie's home and Annie Guthrie's home. And those people have been posting outside these properties for several days now. But this morning, one of these private security guards, who I'm told has a law enforcement background, as they often do, was seen walking down the driveway towards the mailbox, Nancy Guthrie's mailbox. And as he's walking down the driveway, he's slapping on like these black latex gloves. He has no insignia on, no gun, no badge, nothing. He's this private security guard, I'm told. And actually, Brian Enton confirmed for me he was a private security guard. And he puts on these black latex gloves, and he opens Nancy Guthrie's mailbox and starts emptying the contents into a plastic bag. Closes up the mailbox and takes the plastic bag back with him. Given everything that's been going on, that is not unusual. And quite frankly, you've probably heard several experts in the business of kidnap for ransom who say that most of the communications go directly to the family. They like to keep the media and the police out of it, typically. The last thing that they usually want is the police to know. In fact, that's often a demand. Say anything to the police and we will do something dire to your loved one, which is another reason why so many people are so suspect of these ransom demands, because they went through not only the media, but the tip lines. Like, who sends a ransom demand to a tip line at a local TV station? That's how they came in, through the web process, right? But this would be something that I would think investigators would do every morning. But this was the first time we'd seen it, or at least we'd witnessed it, that they're collecting the mail from outside of Nancy Guthrie's home. So then additional agents arrived again at Nancy Guthrie's home. And we are on day 8 now, right? A full week has passed where the search was called off 7 days ago. And more agents arrive and are out behind Nancy Guthrie's pool and garden area outside the walls of her back door. That's in the very rugged terrain. Again, cacti, rugged desert, and they're out there again, poking around, just searching around. Don't know why, don't know what it was that sent them there, but there they were. And then they left. So the mystery just sort of continues, especially given the fact that it didn't seem that there was that much need for searching early in the week, and now it seems there's need every day and in 2 different properties. And then, don't get sidetracked by this, but the local reporters sort of had to do a, whiplash, because sheriff's deputies had their lights going, and 2 sheriff's vehicles went flying down the road to a neighbor at the end of the cul-de-sac. You could see the neighbor from Nancy's driveway. But these 2 sheriff's deputies with 2 vehicles with their lights, no sirens, pull up to a neighbor's house, park their car, and go knocking on the door, banging on the door. But nobody answers. And then they come back to their cars and they get back into their vehicles, and they're 10 minutes or so. And I think the reporters are all wondering, what on God's green earth is happening now? They get out of their vehicles and they start walking around the left side of the home, and then all the way around the back of the home. And now it looks like they're searching a neighbor's property out the back, right? So there was a lot of consternation and a lot of confusion, and people started to wonder, is this investigation expanding to neighbors now? I can tell you this. It has already expanded to neighbors. They've been asking questions of every neighbor. They've been asking for ring cam. They've been asking, what did you see? Don't think for a minute that just about every neighbor hasn't had a knock at their door to ask what they know. Have you seen anyone in the neighborhood recently? Has there been unusual activity? Any weird vehicles? There's some report that someone saw a white van at some point, but that doesn't seem to be going anywhere at this point. And then an MSNBC reporter later was able to actually get the sheriff's deputies to answer him and clarify what they were doing there. And it turns out that this was a response to a trespassing complaint. I don't know if it was a trespassing complaint with press or whether it was unrelated, but it is not something that is a concern at this point, and that seemed to sort of come and go. And that was just a lot of activity that took everyone's attention away for a short minute. But I will say this, as busy as this day seemed, right, with the probing of the underground tank, septic or water or otherwise, in the backyard at Nancy Guthrie's house, and the activity the night before at Annie Guthrie's house with the photographs in the darkness of night and the agents and the evidence bag and the blue, latex glove, etc. Today did seem to be quieter and less activity. But the sheriff said again, no more news conferences today and nothing until it's warranted, and reiterated that they have identified no suspects, no persons of interest, nor any vehicles of interest. The key word being identified. They have not identified. That means they haven't told us. And we know that. They haven't told us publicly. What they're doing in private could be something entirely different, because that is the way law enforcement operates. They don't share everything with us publicly. That's usually the fact, right? That doesn't mean that there's not a lot going on behind the scenes. And of course, we've already learned from the Chevron and the Circle K that the FBI actually was there asking about surveillance video about vehicles. So there are vehicles they're interested in. And no one's been ruled out as a suspect, as they'll say publicly. So it is just fascinating the way in which this continues to drip, drip, drip. The investigation showing up, leaving, showing up and leaving. Who knows if we'll get something soon? I mean, with the president telling us that there was something, that was almost definitive, resolution, all those things, that was Friday night. And I thought maybe this weekend we would learn something. I don't know. Look, I don't know what it means. I don't know whether they're at loggerheads. I don't know whether they are getting their ducks in a row. I do know this. They don't share everything with you, and they don't share everything with me. And sometimes when law enforcement does share, they don't always share exactly what's going on, and sometimes they share a red herring. That is their prerogative. That is their business. Do not slight them for it. I've seen people taking the boots to the sheriff. It is unfair. Don't do that. This is a hard job. And this is a community that doesn't see this kind of crime a lot. So let's get back to this story about how the whole sordid tale of Nancy Guthrie's abduction began. The story that came to us was that somebody from church reported that Mrs. Guthrie had not shown up for church and that they'd alerted the family done the wellness check. But then we come to learn through other sources that reportedly she hadn't gone to church since the pandemic and that she live streamed the church services. And then there was other reporting that the church said this is not a two-way live stream. It's not like a Zoom call where, you know someone's on the Zoom call, they know you are, and you can talk back and forth. A live stream is something you just take in like a Netflix movie, and that they would not necessarily know that someone's live streaming, that there would be no alert that maybe Mrs. Guthrie wasn't on the church live stream. And, to that point, I had a very good conversation with Megan Kelly about this and just how unusual that whole Sunday morning piece was when this all began. Have a look.
The timeline was changed dramatically on Sunday morning. What this sheriff had been saying to us before was that at 11 o'clock or just after 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, the family was notified by a friend in the church who noticed Nancy didn't attend, and they went over to her house, and about an hour later, they called 911. That was the story this whole week.
That created a lot of consternation.
Then we got to the... And many people said, why did it take an hour? How do you, like, especially seeing blood outside of the house, like Brian Enton got on camera, who would take an hour? Now, then last night or yesterday at the presser, that totally shifted. He said they got to the house and discovered she was missing at 11:57 a.m. So we've lost a whole hour now, the controversial hour, and called law enforcement 5 minutes later at 12:03.
Yeah, I think it was 7 minutes later.
Sorry. My math is off.
By the way,
my math is off. Okay.
7 is lightning fast.
That's fast. Okay, so it's a dramatic difference. But here, let's just listen. Here's what he had said prior to yesterday. This was the story, SOD 18.
Sometime earlier that morning, they got a call from somebody at the church who said, hey, your mom's not here. The family went to the house. I'm thinking they spent some time looking for her themselves before they called us. So I'm guessing maybe they got there around 11. So they did some searching and realized we need some help, and they called 911.
She was dropped off at 9:30, and she was found to be missing at about 11 o'clock Sunday morning.
I know that when we got there, the family was already there, and they had already spent some time looking, as you would expect. Probably we got an hour delay there from them. Not anything intentional, just that, they went and looked and made some calls, and then they decided we better call 911.
And at 11:56 a.m., the family checks on Nancy and discovers her missing. And at 12:03 p.m., 911 is called in to the Pima County Sheriff's Department.
What? Because just to underscore it here, first they got a call from a friend at the church around 11:10. Then he says it was at about 11. Then he told you, that middle clip is on your show. He says they found out about 11 and it was about an hour delay before they called 911. Now, yesterday, he says they checked on Nancy and discovered her missing at 11:57. Right? Is it I keep
11:57. No, that's the right number. That's the right number.
Yeah, 57. So what do you mean? Because we've also, in the midst of all that, had both the Daily Mail and Brian Enton yesterday told us as well, reporting that Nancy Guthrie wasn't going to church physically anymore and hadn't been since the COVID pandemic, that she'd been joining the live stream the church offers and participating from her home. Moreover, the Daily Mail reports it wasn't a Zoom situation where the congregants could see who was joining virtually. It was just a live stream being blasted out by the church, outgoing only. And therefore, no one would be aware of whether Nancy was participating or not. So how do we go from she talked to a friend who was concerned at the church, which you heard him say on camera there, and they took him an hour and then they called 911, to now it's they checked on Nancy and discovered her missing and within moments called 911.
Yeah, I think these are all things that lead to an even bigger mystery and a little confusion. I always give law enforcement grace when there's so much going on and there's an exigent circumstance, and now all these ransom notes, which have taken law enforcement's direction elsewhere. Let's be honest, this is awful. These ransom notes, especially the one in California, if this guy is guilty of this, it has taken their attention away. But it's a, fog of war is not easy. I can understand how there'd be communication breakdown. There's other agencies coming in, sharing of information, maybe telephone, the game of telephone makes mistakes. But I do think that it adds to another element of confusion about this.
I think you're being too nice in this situation. With all due respect to the sheriff, as well as I do, the time she was discovered missing is very important.
It's critical.
It's not fog of war. It is not fog of war. That you know.
Yeah, it shouldn't be. Maybe the dissemination of it was, though. The only grace I give is that it is a complicated task that they're undergoing, and we don't make it
Nobody
easier.
asked about it. Somebody in that room needed to say, "You've adjusted the timeline dramatically, Sheriff. Why?"
Yeah, no, there was lots that I wish they'd followed up on the car being towed and being processed by warrant. I mean, where
Yes.
was that? Like, hold it.
You and I are going to have to fly out there for the next one. Literally, I think you and I are going to have to fly out there together for the next one. That's at least 4 questions, 2 for you and 2 for me. Yeah, seriously. Like I was very frustrated because it was like, that's an obvious one. Ask that. And the one about the car was the other one. Like he just sort of elided around it. It was like,
Yeah.
car, standard search warrant, court orders,
The house,
crime scene.
not which house.
Wait.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I know.
Nancy's house is the crime scene. Was it towed from Nancy's house or was it towed from Annie's house, Sheriff?
I haven't gotten to the bottom of that yet. There may be a very good reason. Let's just say, for instance, she live streamed with a friend on speakerphone and the friend couldn't get through and thought, she's not joining me for church on speakerphone. Maybe that's it. Still trying to get to the bottom of that. But I think one thing we have gotten to the bottom of is that although the sheriff told us multiple stories, it seems that most people are settling on the last thing that the sheriff told the New York Times, and that was that the night before, on Saturday night, her son-in-law was the last person to see her dropping her off. Not the daughter and the son-in-law. It seemed as though that the definitive answer to the New York Times was the son-in-law, even though at the last press conference the sheriff gave us, family, we're just going to go with family. So we're sort of still in the same boat, waiting for the next shoe to drop, waiting for the next big investigative piece. I will continue to keep you updated the best I can, but obviously this is a very complicated story with a deadline coming Monday, 5 o'clock, from these alleged kidnappers and their ransom demands. Watch this space. We'll see what happens after tomorrow. As always, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate you. I'm so thankful you're part of this community, and I'm so thankful that you're part of this podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And remember, the truth isn't just serious. It's drop dead serious.